Alright, so if you've been following the solution so far, in our previous videos we've established which character narrates each scene, we've established the chronological order of each scene, and we've established the relationships that each character has with each other within the Wheeler family. Now that we have all this information, we are finally ready to extract specific data points to fill in specific cells within this grid. So the way I'm going to approach this is I'm just going to go down each column because each column corresponds not only with a specific character but also with a specific scene, and that'll make things a little bit easier to follow, I think. Okay, so let's just jump in here with scene number 1, Wanda's scene. And we know, because it's explicitly stated, that Wanda sits at seat number 8. We know that it takes place at 11 o'clock because Henry Stapleton says it is the 11th hour. Henry Stapleton says it's the 11th hour in more ways than one. We don't know Wanda's height. We don't know her grade. We do know that she and Amy are both apparently Geminis, from what Chris says in scene 12. And we are going to go with the astronomical version of Gemini rather than the astrological version. In other words, we're going to go with the corrected version that Greg gave us in scene number 8, which means that Gemini straddles the months of June and July. So we'll just plug those in for Wanda and Amy as the 6th and 7th month. Okay, set month, we'll leave that alone for now. We will come back to that later, however. Roger is explicitly stated in scene 1 to be sitting in seat 2. The time of Roger's scene isn't explicitly stated. We can make a reasonable guess just based on where the photographer says the sun is. I believe he says that it's high enough in the sky that the sun isn't in your eyes, but low enough for some contrast. That would indicate sometime in mid-morning or late afternoon. But the spread of possible values here is too high for me to justify marking them down, so we're going to leave that alone for now. How about Roger's height? We know that is 4.5 feet tall. That's explicitly stated within scene 7. And we know that he is in the 8th grade, which is also explicitly stated in scene 7. We don't know Roger's birth month. We don't know its set month, but we know a possible range. We know that this photograph was taken at some point in the autumn, or taken at some time in the autumn, which gives us a range of September, October, and November for the possible set months. Okay, moving on now to Jimmy. We don't know what seat Jimmy is, but there's actually a little trick we can determine to figure out something about Jimmy's seat, and indeed a certain thing about the seats of Melody, Violet, and David as well. In scene number 1, we have a point here where it says, Melody stretches awkwardly behind the chairs of David and Grandpa to grip the left hand of her spouse, who is considered to have the next best chance of inheritance, and mouths left hand rule in apparent reassurance. So first of all, let's just get out of the way the unnamed characters here. Grandpa is referring to Wanda's grandpa, which is going to be Jim, and Melody's spouse is going to be Violet. If you have not seen the video, that was established in our family tree section. But what does this actually tell us about the seats that they are sitting in? Well, we know that everything on one side of the table is an even seat, and everything on the other side of the table is an odd seat. And we also know that Wanda is sitting on the side with 2 other empty seats, and she has an even seat. The fact that there's only 3 other people on her side besides herself tells us that these 4 characters, Melody, Jim, David, and Violet, are not on the even side. So those people all have odd numbered seats, and we will indicate that here just by mentioning that it's odd. Okay, moving on down Jimmy's column, we have the time. We don't know the time right now. We will be able to deduce that later, though, without reference to any of the other Sudoku values. We will come back to that. Jimmy's height we don't know. His grade at the time of his scene we don't know. His birth month we don't know, but we have a range of values here because we are told in scene number 7, Alistair says, "Happy 40th, Jimmy," indicating that his birthday is actually on that during, I should say, actually during scene number 7. Since scene number 7 takes place during September, October, or November, we know that Jimmy's birthday is in either September, October, or November. How about a set month? Now this is interesting. It's not explicitly stated, but we can figure it out. Why? Well, because in scene number 3, at the very end, it says, "Grandpa and I sit quietly together for a while longer, watching the sun set out of the window on our Arizona town, the pocket watch open on my lap. Usually, the sun is blocked by trees or buildings, but today, the sun sets at the other end of the road leading to the hospital, directly to the west." Why is that relevant? If you didn't know this already, it's explicitly mentioned in scene number 10. Melody, what does the West mean to you? On a technical and local level, west is the direction of the sunset on the spring and fall equinoxes. It's not stated within this story, but at other times during the year, this sun either sets to either the southeast, or rises to the southeast or northeast and sets to the northwest or southwest. But the fact that it sets directly in the west and close enough to the west to actually shine down the road and not be blocked by trees or buildings tells us that this is very close to the equinox, which tells us that scene number 3 is set in one of the equinox months. If you don't know which months are equinox months, those are also explicitly stated within the story in scene number 8. Let's see if we can find those real quick. Around March 20th, Earth experiences another equinox. Here, this is where Earth would be on September 23rd. Notice how the sun is shining on this line halfway between the north and south pole. That's the equator. When the sun shines directly on the equator, everywhere on the planet has days and nights that are exactly 12 hours long. This is the other equinox. So, our possible values for Jim's the month that Jim's scene is set in is going to be one of the equinox months. It's either going to be March or September. Now this is actually useful for another reason. As we just mentioned, the days and nights of equinoxes are exactly 12 hours long. We also know from scene number 8 that Arizona, which scene number 3 is set in, does not experience daylight savings time. What does that mean? Well, that means that midnight, 12 o'clock, is actually pretty much in the middle of the night. There's a slight variation depending on where you are in your specific time zone. It does turn out, and this is a reasonable deduction to make, I think, based on this information, and it does actually turn out to be the case that most places in Arizona are within a half hour of that. Solar noon in Arizona is within a half hour of 12 o'clock. So, what does this mean? It means that since solar noon is within half an hour of 12 o'clock, solar midnight is within a half an hour of 12 midnight, 12 o'clock. That means that if the days and nights are exactly 12 hours long each, and midnight is exactly in the middle of the night, well, where are our sunset times going to be? Our sunset time is going to be right around 6 o'clock. That's going to be our time for Jimmy. Now that's close to the most difficult deduction that we can make in the story just based on facts given within the story. But there's actually another point that's actually deduced based on this time, or based on this value that we've just determined. We'll get to that in a moment. So we've just determined his set month. Let's move on to Melody's numbers and values for her column. We've already established that she's sitting in an odd seat and we don't know much else about her. The time, it's mentioned in her scene that she has a 2 o'clock appointment. So we're going to input 2 for the time. Her height, she says she's 3/4 of an inch short of 5 feet tall. In other words, she's 4'11". Her grade is also mentioned. She says she's going to graduate in May. In other words, she's a senior. She's in 12th grade. Her birth month is also mentioned. She says she's going to turn 18 in March. The set month, we don't know. I should mention also that we are going to leave the relative ages of each of these characters alone for now because that's something we have to sort relative to each other, and the line to the helm, or the line of succession, we're also going to leave alone for the moment. Okay, moving on to Greg. We don't know anything about his seat number. We don't know, well, actually, I was thinking of a different scene that Greg was in, but in Greg's scene, in scene number 8, we know that it's right around 3 o'clock, right around when school lets out. Mrs. Ramirez specifically says that she has time to fit in some information about the zodiac before 3 o'clock. So we can input that value in this cell. Greg's height in or during his scene is 4'4", which is stated explicitly. His grade is, of course, the first grade. His birth month is not explicitly stated, but we again have a couple of different values that might fit. Greg says that he's not a Sagittarius, but he is instead a Scorpius. The astrological Sagittarius straddles November and December, and the sun is actually in Sagittarius, or is actually in Scorpio during November and December, which means that Greg's birth month is either in November or December. What month is it set in? Greg states at some point that it's near the end of the month, or his teacher says it's nearly the end of the month, so the sun's in Gemini. And Greg disputes this, saying that no, it isn't. The sun moves from astrological sign to astrological sign in the middle of their month and is in its associated month during the end of its month. So in other words, since it's the end of the month, and the teacher thought that that meant that they were in Gemini, they are actually in Taurus, which Greg states, and the month in which, at the end of that month, the sun is in Taurus is May. So we can put that in. Okay, and this we know just because we have also a section in scene number 8, and I'm just going to point that out real quick in case you're confused about this. The sun is in front of a different constellation each month. Starting with January, when the sun is in Capricorn, it then passes through Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, and this whole list here is supposed to give us a month to associate with each astrological sign or constellation. And Greg, as we've stated, states that in actuality, the associated month starts in the middle, or the associated astrological sign starts in the middle of that month and continues until the middle of the next month, which is why the sun is in Taurus at the end of May. Okay, I think we've covered that well enough. We don't know anything about, moving on to Tim here, Tim's column. We don't know anything about Tim's seat. The time of Tim. This cell here is probably the most difficult to deduce based on other information given within the story, but we can deduce it. How do we know what time it is during Tim's scene? The answer is going to have to do with the stopped clock. We know that the stopped clock starts at exactly the correct time. So in other words, the time on the stopped clock represents the time that this scene takes place in. What is the time on that stopped clock? It's going to be the same as the time that was represented in scene number 3. In that scene, Jimmy complains that the clock is set to daylight saving time, which is incorrect because they live in Arizona, which does not recognize daylight saving time. What does that mean? Well, it means that Jimmy looked at the clock and saw it was an hour ahead of the actual time. We've already established that the time that Jimmy's scene takes place in is 6 o'clock. Since the clock is actually stopped at an hour ahead of 6 o'clock, that means that the time that it started back up again in scene 11 is 7. 7 o'clock. Okay, every other deducible value within this grid is going to be easier than this value to determine. I'll tell you that right now. We don't know Tim's height, we don't know his grade, we don't know his birth month, and we don't know his set month. Okay, so let's move on to Amy. We don't know what seat she's at. We don't know what time she's at. We don't know her height. We don't know her grade. We don't know her set month. We know basically absolutely nothing about Amy other than what we have already been given. As we've already established, though, she is apparently born when the sun was in Gemini, which means that the sun was in, or it was either the month of June or the month of July. Okay, moving on to Violet, we know that her seat is odd. We don't know what time her scene takes place in. We don't know her height. We don't know her grade, but we can have a list of values. She mentions that in the photograph she was a 4th grader, and that the photograph was taken 6 years ago. Now, when people in English say something was 6 years ago, what they actually mean was that it was either sometime in between exactly 5 years ago and exactly 7 years ago. So we don't actually know that Violet is necessarily in the 10th grade. She could be she could be in 9th grade, and she could reasonably say that this photograph took place 6 years ago. She could be in 10th. She could be in 11th. But we do have a very limited range of possibilities here that could reasonably apply. Okay, moving on, we don't know her birth month. We do know something, though. We don't know what her birth month is, but we do know that whatever her birth month is, it's the same as whatever month Melody's scene takes place in. So whatever her month here is, it's going to have to match this set month. And that's just something we're going to have to keep in mind for later. I'm not really sure how we can specifically designate that. And we also don't know what month this scene takes place in. Okay, so let's move on to Bridget. We don't know what seat she's in. We don't know what time her scene takes place in. We do know her height. She says that in her scene, Roger is 5'10", and she also says that that is a full foot taller than her, which means that she is 4'10". Moving on, we don't know her grade, but she had to repeat the 11th grade, which means that she's either in 11th or 12th grade. Her birth month, we actually established during Greg's scene. She thinks she's a Leo, but she's actually a Cancer, and either way, she's going to end up straddling the months of July and August. So that's going to be 7 and 8 for potential values for her birth month. Her set month, we don't know, but she does say that her birthday is in a couple weeks during her scene, which means that at the earliest, the month that scene takes place in is going to be June. It also could take place in July. There's no way it could take place in August, because if it did take place in August, her birth month has to be a unique value and couldn't be any time later than August. So her set month has to be either June or July. Okay, moving on to David. We only know that his seat is odd. The time we actually do know. It's one of the few things explicitly stated in his scene. He says, "The morning has ended, the morning has begun." This is to indicate that since the morning has just ended, it is 12 noon, high noon, and that's about all that's explicitly stated within his scene. We don't know his height or his grade or his birth month, but we do know his set month from a different scene. We know that from Chris's scene, where Greg agrees to have the duel in August. That tells us that since the duel takes place in August and that scene is narrated by David, David's scene is set in August. Okay. Moving on to Jane, we also don't know her seat. We don't know what time her scene takes place in. We do know it takes place sometime after sunset. We have no idea when that is. And the range of values is too high to list in a single cell. We're going to move on to her height, which we do know because the guard says that she is not 50 inches. 50 inches is 4'2". That tells us that she is the only possible number of inches less than 4'2" within the constraints of our puzzle, which is going to be 4'1". We don't know what grade she's in. It is possible to determine, but it relies on some information that's a little bit obscure and difficult to articulate with the length of the video that we have right now. We'll come back to her grade at a later point. Her birth month, we don't know specifically, but we do know that the sun was in Aries when she was born. And that tells us that since Greg's the one who's telling her this, that means that we're going to use Greg's understanding of the constellations, and that means that she was born in either April or May. Okay, moving on to the set month. We can tell this because we know that the sun is in Greg's constellation during Jane's scene. And what's Greg's constellation? It's Scorpio. So that means that this month is going to be fairly close to this. It's going to be, since we've already established here that the sun is in Scorpio during November or December, we can say that Jane's scene is set in either November or December. Okay, moving on. Last but not least, we have Chris. We don't know what seat Chris is in. We do know the time of Chris's scene, even though it isn't explicitly stated, and that's because Roger said, "You'll never guess where I was 2 hours ago." Where was Roger 2 hours ago? He was at the will reading. The will reading, we know, takes place at 11 o'clock. If this is 2 hours later, it's 1 o'clock. Whoops, let's not make Jane's scene take place in the 121st month. 121st month, I suppose I should say. Okay, so Chris's time is going to be 1 a.m. Because Wanda's scene, it's mentioned that it's late, and so this is going to be 11 p.m. Okay, so we don't know Chris's height, we don't know his grade. His birth month we also don't know. What's his set month? This we can figure out from the fact that Roger says to Greg that Greg has pulled the greatest April Fool's trick on him, which means that we can say that this scene takes place in April. This has implications for the set month of another scene. Every scene, as we've established, has a unique month that it's set in. How is that possible if this scene and Wanda's scene, or scene 1, take place only 2 hours apart from each other? Well, it's possible because they straddle midnight. This scene takes place at 1 a.m. on April 1st, and the scene that takes place 2 hours earlier takes place at 11 p.m. on March 31st. So this, the first scene, Wanda's scene, takes place in March. And that covers just about all the information that we can deduce or directly extract from the story itself. And in our next video, we're going to use all this information to come up with some ages and to fill out the rest of the Sudoku grid. See you then.